We have made major progress in implementing our circular economy action plan, including by proposing a Europe-wide strategy to radically address the challenges of plastics. And a few months ago, we adopted a new action plan on sustainable finance, which aims to reorient capital flows towards sustainable investment, also to manage the financial risks stemming from social and environmental challenges, and encourage transparency and sustainability in the financial and economic activities. In parallel, we promote the green economy through our external action. It is let us say, the surest pathway. I would go as far as to say that the only pathway towards real sustainable development. Let's be clear. The benefits of a green economy go well beyond the strictly environmental. Those whose livelihoods are threatened the most by environmental degradation and climate change are often amongst the poorest and most affected by fragility. The shift to a green economy, therefore, is not just imperative to safeguard our planet. It is also a key piece of the puzzle to address inequalities, create quality jobs, and strengthen the resilience of individuals, communities, and societies. This is the vision at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And it is echoed in our European Consensus on Development, the framework for EU institutions and our member states to implement the global goals through international cooperation. The consensus underlines the need to scale up investment in a low-emission, climate-resilient green economy. This requires coherent action across sectors, including energy, agriculture, and infrastructure. It also means ensuring coordination between all actors. I firmly believe that we need to engage more effectively with the private sector to support green businesses and sustainable consumption and production across value chains. And I'm truly encouraged by the participation of many business leaders in today's discussion. The European Union recently launched the European External Investment Plan with the goal to generate at least 44 billion euros of additional new public and private investments by 2020, which will also support the green economy. Close to 30% of the financing under our new guarantee schemes under this investment plan will be devoted precisely to leveraging investments in climate action, renewable energy, and resource efficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, our partnership for action on the green economy is already bearing fruit on the ground. For example, by contributing to a national strategy on green jobs in Senegal and to policy reforms on sustainable finance in Mongolia, for instance. The European Union has already allocated 8 billion euros to PAGE, and we are determined to build further on that. We want to see our partnership grow and expand beyond 2020, stepping up our action, also through better reporting. At a time when some try to label climate change as fake news and basic environmental standards as barriers, partnerships such as ours are indispensable to inspire others and increase our impact on the global scale for a greener and fairer future for all. We all know the environmental issues, climate change issues, green economy issues are at the heart of the sustainability concept of the development or development goals. But when it comes to sustainability, we are developing countries. We all have a work to do, and this is my message that would be so important for our further engagement in the sustainable green economy actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for sharing your thoughts. Let's give the floor now to Rita Schwarzler-Sutter, the Parliamentary State Secretary from Germany. We look forward to listening to some of your remarks on the inclusive green economy and the leading efforts that Germany's been taking.
Thank you. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side a warm welcome, and I think we have to discuss here how we can further speed up the transformation towards a more sustainable and fair world as envisioned by the 2030 agenda. It is evident that we have already achieved a lot. Just think about the success of renewable energies and affordable, or of the emerging market of green bonds. At the same time, business as usual approaches often prevail. If we are serious about meeting the SDGs in time, it will be crucial to get the sustainable debate out of the niche and into the mainstream. It is not enough if the 2030 agenda serves as a topic for fine speeches or as framing for sustainability strategies of both companies and governments. Instead, the 2030 agenda truly has to become the guiding principle for every single of our actions. There are some promising signs that this shift is already starting to take place. Thanks to the Chinese G20 presidency, climate and environmental issues are today normal topics of the G20. I'm very glad to see that Argentina has chosen building consensus for fair and sustainable development as the overarching theme of their current presidency. And following up on the report of a higher-level expert group, the EU Commission has initiated extensive work on making the European financial system more sustainable and compatible with the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement. It is especially noteworthy that this work is led by the Directorate for Financial Stability, Financial Service and Capital Market Unit. I very much hope that the EU Commission will keep up the high ambitious level set by the HLEG report. Of course, making more sustainable production methods and lifestyles, the new business as usual will imply major changes for a number of economic sectors, as certain business models will not be profitable in the long run anymore. The coal mining industry is, from my point of view, an example for this. Risk-informed decision-making will lead to more sustainable investments and business models. We have to be honest that there won't be only win-win situations. In both industrialized and developing countries, we must therefore ensure the success of a structural transformation. And without causing structural breaks. Then we have the win-win situation for the populists, and they don't want. We have to cushion the social consequences of structural change. Having this in mind, the German government has recently instituted a commission for growth, structural change and development, composed of politicians, industry, trade unions, environmental NGOs and academia, which is mandated to work on a plan for the phasing out of coal and to suggest measures to ease the transformation process for the affected regions. I'm aware that this is not going to be an easy task. However, we have some experiences also with phasing out of the nuclear power. However, we truly want to meet the ambitious goals of the 2030 agenda. We need to start to bring all affected stakeholders to the table and have an honest dialogue about the opportunities. That's important. Not only the risks, but also the challenges. The opportunities we have to show. This all being said, I'm very glad that PAGE and UNICEF are hosting this high-level event today, which is not only addressing the classical sustainable community, but also all actors from industry, finance, labor, and the tech sector, as well as thought leaders from civil society. I'm therefore sure that this event will contribute to the further mainstreaming of the 2030 agenda and will serve at the same time as a forum for an open and honest dialogue between all important players in this area. I'm very much looking forward to the fruitful discussions, and I think all in this room have power, and we need this power to implement the SDGs. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam State Secretary. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to our final speaker of this opening panel, Eric Solheim, the Executive Director for UN Environment.
Thank you so much. I feel so ashamed and small in this panel. I mean, here in Croatia, the fantastic success of the Soccer World Cup, Sweden doing very well, Germany at least present there, not doing so well, but not even in Russia. Such a shame compared to these other guys. And our population is more or less the same as Croatia, and they do everything, we do nothing. So congratulations. We are living also not only an exciting time when it comes to soccer, but it's a really exciting time when it comes to environment and development. Because for the first time in human history, a new model is possible. The old model we all know. Started in the United Kingdom, then going to the rest of Europe, then to the United States, then to Japan, Korea, finally to China. It was very simple. First you develop. First, all forces for economic growth and development, and then when you reach a certain level, you start taking care of the environment. That was the old model. But it's a model of the past, because a new model is now for the first time in human history possible. May not have been possible in the past. Last year we produced more new energy into the global grid from solar, oil and gas, and coal and nuclear combined. That's a turning point. And I can mention a number of other economic parameters which show that for the first time a new model is possible. And we see this taking root all over the planet. In China, which is turning around on the environment at a speed no one has done in human history up to this point, President Xi has coined the slogan, "Green is gold." What does it mean? It means that by going green, you can create any number of jobs and economic prosperity and bringing people out of poverty by taking care of the environment. In India, Prime Minister Modi has given a completely new message to the Indians. All was, do we Indians want to develop, or do we want to protect Mother Earth? And then, surprise, most Indians at the time wanted to develop. Prime Minister Modi has turned this around, saying we can develop and bring electricity to all Indians. By the way, India just passed the mark where every single out of the 700,000 villages in India was connected to the grid. But we can do it by solar and wind. It says Swatch India, meaning clean up India, make India clean, providing toilets to all Indians, and through that providing any number of jobs and economic prosperity and bringing people out of poverty. And moving on to Europe, it's no coincidence that Germany and the Nordics are the most successful economies in Europe. The most fastest growing, the least unemployed, but also the most environment friendly at the same time. Germany has made an enormous economic opportunity by going green, but same as Sweden and the other Nordics. So there's no choice to be made between the green and the gold, between the economy and the environment opportunity. We can do all the same at the same time. And if you ask for one answer to that, Germany. But if you add the Nordics, India, China, and many other examples, a new development and economic and environment model is possible. The one new step which we want to take is now to really also move into sustainable consumption, discussing what the individual can do. But please, let's never do that as moralistic finger-pointing to bring us nowhere. Let's not do it as a theoretical exercise for the already green. Bring us nowhere. It must be an issue for the man in the street, for the average person, not just for the converted environmentalists. And that's, by the way, what we have been able to do with the plastics. We have been able to make plastics a kitchen table conversation all over the planet, and through that mobilize citizens to want to change, to pressure garments for change, and mobilize business in changing. And I'm sure we can do the same on textiles, as Carolina brought up, on electronics, and in any other sector, as long as we frame this as an enormous economic opportunity, something fun and interesting, something non-moralistic, an issue where you can engage as a citizen, but at the same time putting pressure on politics and economics. Finally, in Brussels, very recently, I agreed with your colleague, Mr. Timmermans, that Minister Vella, Commissioner Vella, my colleague down there, that Europe, the European Union environment, that we will invite a number all other actors into. Let's set up a global plastics platform to exchange views as to how we can determination and speed phase out one-use plastic, learn from the good examples, bring it to other places, provide assistance to those nations needed, and engage with all the businesses and private sector in these endeavors. So much to be done, and we are so lucky, we are living in the most exciting of times.
Thank you. Thank you. Eric, thank you so much for your remarks. Christina would like to add something in response to that.
Thank you. Respect for your time. I just wanted to add an invitation to join Sweden in an initiative that we will launch tomorrow with help with Eric and together, for example, with Finland. We think it is time to step up the work on chemicals and waste, which is in our regards at key of sustainable lifestyles, but also in reaching the 2030 agenda. And we will launch an alliance on high ambitious countries and stakeholders that will be willing to work with us on a global deal on chemicals. We think it is time to think boldly on chemicals. Any country or stakeholders here wanting to join us, please contact myself or any of the Swedish mission in this work.
Thank you very much. Our opening panel has done a really wonderful job of framing some of the discussions and issues that we want to highlight today. Thank you very much. I know that some of our speakers may have to leave us to attend some of the other duties that they have during this busy week at the UN. So thank you very much. Please do exit the stage on the left-hand side, and we'll continue our next panel. Thank you. My mother always said I never needed a mic, so I'm sure you can still hear me back there. Okay, good. Okay, good. I'd like our panelists on. And we could go into the next segment. This is quite high. So our next panel discussion is the second one today, and this session is called Greening the Green, Future-Proofing Finance. So during this session, our experts are going to look at some of the challenges and the opportunities for reshaping our financial system. So they take environmental and social risks into account. And the Minister really did underscore that quite strongly earlier, that we've got to take on the financial institutions and just be more engaged and have a greater participation. When it comes to the ideas and the innovations that are needed to drive green investment, green business practices, and really put sustainability into profitability and transition away from what we know to be business as usual. So it's my pleasure to start with our first speaker, Mr. Alvaro Garcia, the Director of the Office of Planning and Budget, the Office of the President from Uruguay. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Garcia. Could you share with us some of the policies and initiatives that Uruguay is taking to advance the inclusive green economy when it comes to public finance.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Uruguay is a small country, South America, 3.4 million people, and our income per capita is almost $17 per year, and we have a Gini index of 0.38. This is very important to our country. In the same level to put economical growth and the distribution income. And we are very committed with sustainable development goals from the beginning. And before the beginning, because it's very similar to the model that Uruguay has several years ago. Some examples of building sustainable development in Uruguay. For example, we have a national development strategy to 2050 with concrete plans for 2030. It's very important for us to work in long term. We have a national infrastructure agenda. We have right now an organization in a system in order to work together, public sector and private sector, called Transform Uruguay. We have 9 agencies of the public sector working especially for the economical development with sustainability. We have environmental policy, access to drinking water and sanitation for almost the complete population, and territorial planning. We have some production policies like energy policy. I will talk about this after. Telecommunications, agriculture policies, and sustainable tourism. We have Plan Ceibal. Plan Ceibal is one laptop per child. We have today every kid in school and in college with a computer provided by the state and connected with internet for all the kids and teenagers in Uruguay. We had an important poverty and indigency reduction, and we have a policy of financial inclusion. We are in page since past year. We made some progress. Creation of a governmental page group, a management committee, and an advisory committee. We have a participation of the academy, private sector, and civil society. I want to give you an example about modestly what our country contribute to the renewable energies. We have almost 100% of the electric power generation based in renewable energy sources. Basically, in the last years, historically, with hydraulic power. But in last year, a strong advance of eolic energy. And we create a system that we could finance this huge change in our country. Our experience is the following. Uruguay has implemented a strong change in its energy matrix. Today, 100% of the electric generation is based on renewable energy sources. Much of this success has been associated to innovative form of financing. Uruguay has a public energy company which enjoys great prestige and high credit rating. This company has called tenders in public-private partnership modalities and similar, which allows the private sector to finance energy change. The contracts ensure a payment for the price of the energy supplied of over 15 or more years, so there are a very small risk for the private sector. This permits that business happen. These modalities have allowed the participation of institutional investors in Uruguay and in the world, and the Uruguayan stock market. With another thing very important for us, that part of the financing opened to the public to encourage savings for the population. So this was a public policy that permits advance with renewable energies and encourage the savings of the population and to move the financial system in order to make new tools to finance sustainable development.
Could you give us the one greatest challenge that you've had and how Uruguay has overcome it when it came to dealing with the inclusive green economy?
Yes, I think that one really important challenge is the waste. We will inform tomorrow in our revision, voluntary revision, but I can say you in advance that we put a law in the parliament and we have a high expectations to have success with waste, and in the same way that we had success in energy and in other topics.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to our next speaker, Jens Frølich-Holt, the State Secretary with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Norway. Mr. State Secretary, Norway is a big leader in many areas when it comes to the green economy and sustainable development. Can you share with us some of your country's experiences when it comes to advancing green finance?
Thank you. And as Erik Solheim said, we're a small country with a very bad football team. Uruguay, you're doing quite well, but nonetheless, we do have other things such as $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, which is relevant for this discussion, because we do see that there is a great need for greening our economies and especially greening the financial sector. The financial sector will play a crucial role in achieving the sustainable development goals because the goals will need to be financed in some way. And you know, I do feel ever since the financial crisis, bankers have been looked down upon, been frowned upon, and sometimes for good reasons. But what I always say in these settings is that we should remind ourselves that banking is socially useful when it's done right. I mean, it's about channeling money to socially useful projects. So we all need to work on making banking beautiful and making it a beautiful thing. It's possible, and events like this I think it's a way forward. Norway is doing a number of things to green our financial sector. First and foremost, and perhaps best known, is our sovereign wealth fund, which they are constantly assessing climate-related risks and actually doing divestments based on climate-related risk issues. They are also, by request of our parliament, they have a climate criteria also for excluding companies where a certain percentage of the revenue derives from coal. So they also have a specific mission, and the result has been tremendous. They are, I think they're doing quite well, and of course they are operating within a strict mandate and doing it in a very professional and independent manner. That's important to emphasize from my part. We also have a financial authority in Norway, which recently were given a mandate to explore and to make financial companies report on their how they assess climate risks. I mean, they are not doing value judgment on the climate risk itself, but they are checking that companies actually have financial companies have a practice and a sound practice when it comes to assessing climate risk and integrating that in their risk assessment. So that's something that's actually going to be in place this year. And finally, what I would say is the most important thing that we're doing in Norway. We have these roadmaps towards a green economy. We made around 13 of them in a collaboration between the government and various sectors of our economy. The financial sector has made a roadmap for greening their sector. I think it's a very ambitious piece of work. They are talking about including stress testing portfolios against zero emissions in 2050. They are also, I mean, for the insurers, they are looking at the requirements when you rebuild something after a disaster, that you should rebuild it, build it back better and stronger than before. And also the financial sector wants to create a better market for green bonds. So I think this process of making roadmaps in a partnership between the government and the various, I think it's business confederations of the sectors, has been very fruitful, and for the financial sector, it's created a movement within the finance sector, because there are the people working in banks, people working in insurers. They also care about climate. So having these public roadmaps, or these roadmaps being made through public consultations, is extremely valuable and brings out the beautiful things of banking.
And with the roadmap on the financial sector that you're talking about, what do you think is the most important thing that needs to happen in order to make that roadmap a success?
Yeah, I would say perhaps the most radical thing is strict stress testing of your portfolio, investment portfolio or lending portfolio. If you do that rightly, it's a very strong tool. I think, I mean, the limits or the counter forces, in a sense, will be that, of course, Norway is it's an economy based on oil and gas exploration. It's a Norwegian paradox. We have extremely clean energy, 100% hydropower. We have very strong engagement internationally for climate and environment, and we also do produce oil and gas very efficiently, of course. But it's always a running debate in Norway on how to manage these things.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Jean-Yves Fillion, the CEO of BNP Paribas USA and Chairman BPN Paribas CIB for the Americas as well. Could you weigh in on this conversation too? And from your perspective, tell us, how can finance and banking in particular play this crucial role in remaking our economies to be greener?
I'm very disappointed because I thought you were going to ask me about the World Cup.
I wanted to leave
I
that
was
to
looking
you,
at you. I was looking at you, but you didn't go there. Just wanted, with pleasure, just wanted to say that I really feel Croatia played amazingly well yesterday. Like in life, I think it applies to sustainability as well, by the way. It's all a matter of timing. Saturday was Bastille Day. Then the French team had no other options but win yesterday. For whoever watched the game, I'm sure most of you did, I just wanted to highlight the good spirit of the French team, because at 4-1, the French goalie, saying it was going to be too severe, basically offered the second goal to Croatia. It was not enough. But we enjoyed playing Uruguay in the quarterfinals after defeating Argentina in the round of 16. It was a good thing. Well, back to... I'm so sorry.
Well, and I heard that God is French.
Thank you for mentioning that. Back to sustainability. Listen, you all know the metrics, but I feel I have to remind them, to mention them. It's so possible. The annual savings in the world, it's 22 trillion. What we need collectively to achieve the SDGs, it's, I was going to say, only 5 to 7 trillion annually, right? Then this is where I believe, and by the way, these investments will create, this is the UN assessment, around 380 million jobs. That's real, right? I believe in this. We believe in this at BNP Paribas. Then for the financing industry, and I really love your comments about the banking industry, I wish we can be at the deliver to your expectations here. What the banking industry, the finance industry should contribute as one of the contributors is basically to manage to channel this 5 to 7 trillion annually until 2030 to just make the SDGs. It's very possible, but I believe it's possible if we look at it in a realistic way, meaning it's for the banking industry, and we're very committed to it here at BNP, to actually create the innovative products to convince investors to basically do it, coming up with products with return, I would say, acceptable risk, and liquidity. Easier said than done. Just to share a few examples, and other firms do it very well. I'm just sharing what my firm has been doing and what I've had the privilege to be involved in to date, because words do not really matter. It's really actions and facts. BNP Paribas has arranged on the road over 160 billion of financings connected to sustainability projects around the world. Something we're very proud of. I think we were the first global institution last year to sign a partnership with the UN, really focusing on providing financing for projects supporting sustainable growth in emerging countries. And we committed to provide 10 billion by 2020, which is by 2025, which is obviously a big objective. There is a project I'm very proud of, which I just would like to share briefly. We actually structured recently, a financing of a sustainable rubber farm in Indonesia, part of this, 10 billion concept, with, conservation of biodiversity, creation of 16,000 jobs. And you know what? Now this farm actually provides approximately 10% of the Michelin, Michelin, the French tire companies, of their natural rubber consumption. I mean, it's just an example, but 16,000 jobs and providing a significant part of one of the global leaders in the tire industry. I think we can make it more opportunistic versus more systematic versus just opportunistic. I think we have a good future ahead of us. But on the day-to-day, because it's more like at the macro level, we've come up with, to your point as well, we've come up with day-to-day solutions for clients, like the vanilla lending, revolving credit facility, which actually cost of funding is connected to the client doing well with their sustainability metrics. Recently, we structured a 2 billion euros, I can share this, for Danone, the food and beverage company. Basically, the cost of fund is linked to Danone meeting their metrics, and if they do well, their cost of funding will be significantly lower. We did it for Puma, sporting goods company. We just are structuring one for a US utility. The energy sector is buying into it as well. That's very encouraging. I should say it's what we do, but as well it's what we decide not to do anymore. We have to be consistent. And I'm just sharing something that BNP Paribas decided to do, which is no easy decision, part of the challenges, by the way. We decided to stop financing companies which principal activity, I'm insisting on principal, is connected to exploring, producing, and distributing oil and gas from shale and from oil sands. I think it's a bold decision. It's complicated. It impacts the client base. It impacts the P&L. It impacts the staff as well. But I think the finance industry has to be very consistent. The last word, but I think a promising evolution. This is just a few examples of what the banking finance industry can do. I can tell you it's becoming a two-way street. Today, clients are coming to us before entering into a new relationship or into a strategic transaction, first asking about what do you do in diversity, in social responsibility. Sustainability becomes top of the list. Staff, my staff cares massively, wants to be updated on what we do in this domain. And more specifically, and I think it's very critical to mention that, applicants, candidates who are looking into joining the firm, particularly the younger generation, X, Y, and Z. They are not so focused anymore on how much am I going to make, how much, what is my career path. They ask about what are your values, what are your sustainability goals. And my point is to say, we believe in the concept because this is the right concept, but even if you purely think economically, if you want to attract the best talent as a global firm today, you'd better be there. Otherwise, you know what? They will go somewhere else. Then at BNP Paribas, we're really looking forward to continuing to be part of the solution with many others, I'm sure.
And briefly, how do you look at validating that success?
Well, I have a wonderful colleague next to me from a wonderful rating agency. It's a great point, because if we want this to work, we'd better have the right benchmarks. Then briefly, we obviously benefit today, and I'm sure you have so much more to share on that, Anna, from the I would say established standards, KPIs such as water consumption, electricity consumption, I would say carbon dimension as well, and that's something which is quite important in terms of KPIs. And we have rating agencies. Well, the same way rating agencies used to rate, the credit of the corporations. Now getting into this domain and basically assessing what we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance behaviors of companies, and I believe Moody's done a wonderful job in this front. And then with this, we can compare the clients and the borrowers' performance versus their objectives. For instance, Danone, I just mentioned, we take an average of some of these ESG scores provided by the rating companies, and this is how we measure whether the economic impact will be positive or negative, and both the clients and the finance providers, feel comfortable with that.
And Anna, I'd like you to get into responding to some of that in a moment, but as the Vice President and Senior Credit Analyst for Moody's Investment Service, Ms. Anna Zubets-Anderson, appropriately I should say, could you just first, before diving into that, give us a sense of what efforts Moody is making in helping green the whole financial system?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. And as has been alluded earlier, the key contribution of Moody's to that, right, is to support information needs of investors, to make sure there is sufficient information out there to enable the investing public to consider environmental risks and the sustainability agenda in making the investment decisions. So there are two efforts within the firm that I would like to highlight on that front. One is ESG initiative, firm-wide ESG initiative that we have. And another one is a fairly new green bond assessment service that I'll touch on. So first on the ESG, the purpose of that initiative is really to enhance transparency over how Moody's incorporates environmental, social, and governance risks in credit analysis. We, of course, have always considered ESG risks to the extent that they were material to the issuer, to the creditworthiness of the issuer. But we as a firm have not always been explicit in highlighting ESG risks in our research and our write-up. So really this initiative is about that, is about making that information clear. And a few years ago, like before 2015, Moody's didn't really have a dedicated ESG department. And now we have a staffed team. We have 13 full-time members, and we have numerous part-time members across the firm globally really working specifically on this. And it sort of permeates the entire organization. It's a very involved dialogue among analysts and leadership and everybody at the firm as to how we incorporate ESG and how we really discuss it openly and enhance transparency in our research. So we published quite a bit of research pieces in the past couple years. There is a dedicated hub. It's moodys.com/ESG. It's very pretty. But that's where that research can be found. And the one that I'm really going to highlight, the first piece was published in 2015 and Refresh is due this year. But it's where we looked at 86 industries,
globally that Moody's covers. And we looked at those 86 industries and we really tried to assess environmental risk as it applies to all of them. And specifically, we identified, but not surprisingly, climate change-related risks, carbon transition-related risks were the highest and most significant. And we identified 14 industries, including oil and gas, for example, that were most exposed to those risks. That heat map is there. It's a very interesting piece of research. And for those 14 industries that are most exposed, we have been publishing research that's specific to each of those industries, discussing how those companies are responding to environmental risk and what that means for us in terms of credit analysis. So 9 pieces are published, 5 to go. That's ESG. That's the initiative that we have. The other aspect that I wanted to highlight is the Green Bond Assessment Service. That's something we've been doing since 2016. It's not part of the credit rating process. It's more of a supplement to the credit ratings. And green bond assessments look specifically at green bonds, of course. So specifically at instruments which are designed to have their proceeds directed towards projects with measurable environmental benefits. So green bonds so far have been a small percentage of the sustainable investing pool, but the market is growing very rapidly, so it's an important area for Moody's. The green bond market has grown from, I think it was 12 billion in 2013, and now it was a little over 160 billion last year. So it's certainly experiencing rapid growth. We think that growth will continue, particularly in emerging markets. Particularly with respect to sovereigns as they're trying to finance their climate-related agendas.
What would you say is the biggest challenge today facing the green bond market?
I think it's disclosure, specifically impact disclosure. It's complicated because green bond projects are very varied. There are a lot of different ones. There are a lot of different KPIs, a lot of different ways to measure impact. Today, we don't really have comparability in the marketplace to measure the environmental impact that's achieved by those projects. So that's partly why our green bond assessment process, green bond assessment service actually does not measure impact. At the moment, we really can't. We really look at the quality of the issuer's policies and procedures related to the process, related to the use of proceeds, and related to the future disclosures. But I think that's the biggest challenge to the market, is really developing that infrastructure to have the disclosures as to how the impact is measured. We need something that's consistent, that's granular level, clearly measurable, and comparable among different issuers.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jean-Pierre Clamadieu, the CEO of Solvay. Mr. Clamadieu, could you share with us some of your thoughts on how sustainable portfolio management and sustainable solutions really act as a lever for higher growth, higher profits, and positive impact on the planet?
Thank you. Maybe I'm glad that my French colleague took the soccer comments, but just to bridge the soccer with the subject we discussed today, this morning, I left Paris very early, and I can tell you that seeing millions of plastic bottles on the street of Paris, like really a sea of plastic bottles, and I was myself very impressed with when I saw that. It's put really plastic on top of our table discussions. No doubt about this. Maybe as I'm both the Vice Chair of the Worldwide Business Council on Sustainable Development and the CEO of Solvay, I would like to go quickly around 2 initiatives, one collective and one specific to Solvay that answer your question. The collective one is an SDG roadmap that the chemical sector has developed under the auspice of the WBCSD, which I think is a very quality work that we've done with the support of our chemical association, both in the US and in Europe. It's a very simple, pragmatic document. It's not at all communication. It's just to frame the efforts that we are doing in our industry. Chemical really is an industry which supports a lot of our industry. We produce the materials which are transformed by people along various supply chains. And I think we've done a remarkable effort to align our priorities along 10 of the SDGs and with a willingness to demonstrate how we can contribute, and pretty challenging and specific roadmap until 2030, and with a strong focus on transparency and disclosure. And now let me just focus on Solvay and this subject of sustainable portfolio management. Solvay is a global chemical company which has started some years ago a pretty significant portfolio transformation, and we wanted to measure the impact of this portfolio transformation on our sustainability objective. And we have developed a tool, because we have not found one available on the market, through which we measure for each of our products in their various applications 2 elements: manufacturing footprint impact and alignment with the market demand regarding sustainability. And then we can map these couples of products in various applications on a nice matrix. And what we see is an area where we want to have a majority of our activities, where we have the lowest manufacturing impact and the best alignment with market demand regarding sustainability. It's what we call the solutions. And then, on the other part of the matrix, we have what we call the challenges. We've made this public. We have asked our auditors to validate the concept. And we have taken some objectives 3 years ago in one of our capital market day. We've said we want to have, in the next 3 years, and the milestone is 2018, 50% of our sales in what we call the solution part of this matrix. We were below 40 at the time, and we've been able to achieve that. And I think this type of pretty simplistic but very robust tool is a very strong way to demonstrate and to engage with the financial community, our investors, the people who provide us with capital, how the company fares regarding sustainability. We've done some analysis which shows that indeed we have significantly stronger growth in areas that we considered as solutions. And we consider the challenges as being risk area that we need to assess specifically. So a very important tool to engage with our own teams, because the strategy exercise within our organization is made by using this SPM tool. But again, a very important opportunity for us to discuss with our various stakeholders from the financial community about the portfolio transformation of an advanced material and chemical company. So, in a nutshell, if I bridge these 2 initiatives, the collective one and the one we've developed at Solvay, I can probably say, as the speakers on the previous panel, Alleluia. Alleluia, because I think this issue of sustainability is clearly on the table of discussions within companies. The question is not anymore, should we do something? The question is, how can we focus on things that matters? How can we focus on things which align with priorities as they were developed by the UN? And this is clearly a strong accomplishment. Plenty of things yet to do, but I do believe, and I will join what was said by the previous speakers, by transparency and the ability to define key metrics is what we need to be able to go faster in this direction.
Thank you very much. In the interests of time, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Lena Höök, the Senior Vice President for Sustainability at Skanska, which is one of the pioneers within green bonds. Ms. Höök, what would you say are the opportunities and the main challenges as well in launching green projects for green finance?
Yes, let me start with introducing Skanska for all of you that may not have encountered us before. We are a construction corporation, and that means that we build stuff. We build houses, roads, bridges, schools. We built even, or rebuilt the UN headquarters. So maybe you get to know some of our work tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, we don't just want to build. We want to build for a better society. And that's a pretty important notion, because the stuff that we put out there is pretty tangible, and it will hang around for quite some time, about 70 years or so, or even longer. So we are looking into both the social aspect as well as the environmental ones. But let me go further when it comes to the green buildings and the green solutions. There's a lot of materials, a lot of, for example, cement, concrete, and as well steel, of course, when you need to build. That's a heavy carbon footprint right there. It's also major transportations going on regarding to the built environment. And think for yourself how often yourself are in a building or in the built environment. And you can just capture that there's so much construction going on in the world. And if construction corporations take the aim to build for a better society, including counting on the carbon footprint, the energy efficiency, the water efficiency, etc., then we have a large step that we are taking forward just by doing that. So inspired by Erik Solheim that was saying we should not take the moral road, we should not just focus on theory, we should be focusing on the actions and what's tangible. We have actually, together with the Swedish government, or from an initiative from the Swedish government, it seems to be a Nordic phenomenon, doing roadmaps. But the Swedish government asked of the different industries to do roadmaps how Sweden can become fossil-free by 2045. And Skanska was honored to be responsible to head the roadmap when it comes to construction. So the perspective we took was not just our own fossil, it's also the materials, that is from steel, for example, and concrete, etc. And what we came up with was actually that it's possible with today's technique to halve the fossil emissions by 2030. By going further, we need more innovations and more solutions. And in order to do that, at a large scale, we need finance with us. Of course, we need to make it commercially viable as well to build a large scale for a fossil-free future. And just mentioning on that then and coming back to finance and the notion of green bonds, it's all about driving the new solutions, the technology, as well as making it economic viable. For example, it's today possible to build, and we are building, houses in the Nordic regions that we call powerhouses, because they are creating more energy than they are using during their lifetime. So, and we're doing this in Norway, actually. And it's a tough spot if you try to run the operations from a house by solar energy, but it is possible with today's technology, actually. And where we are today then, amongst our own projects, when we talk about having economic viability, amongst our own projects, our own products, so to say, 95% of the market value comes from green projects. So this is quite large scale. And when we're looking to our revenue, that is when our customers are having the possibilities to choose green or vanilla, as you were speaking about. Then we have 43% of our revenue comes from green projects. And right there you can see that there is actually something happening here that is at a large scale possible to produce green projects. And that also makes it possible for investors to invest in. And that is why we started off with green investment and being eligible for green bonds. We launched our first green bond 2014, and it was heavily oversubscribed. And we have yet again launched green bonds this spring, as well as started with direct green loans. And our conclusion is that it's such a great interest from finance when it comes to invest in green bonds and green loans. It's far larger demand than there is actually supply. And even though if we being on the supply side, as you know, economics is a pretty nice situation to be on the supply side when the demand is greater. Yet again, we have to say it has to be larger supply going forward on this, making it a larger market. And Sweden here again stands out. About 10% of the bond market in Sweden is actually green bonds today. It has been an amazing growth. But yet again, Sweden is a small country, so we shouldn't brag about that. Our impact is not the largest, maybe, at a world scale. So our aim now is to reach 100% green financing. Today, we are at 70%, so let me come back in 2 years or so, and let's see where we are at by then.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hook. Appreciate that. I'd like to now engage a couple of speakers from the floor to offer some of their comments as well. First, Ms. Patricia Apiagie, the Deputy Minister for the Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation in Ghana. Please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. I think from the two different groups, we've had a very exciting statements on the floor. And I would like to start by reiterating the fact that there's a wide recognition and commitment to sustainable development by member states of the United Nations. And this collective efforts and aspiration is evident through the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. An inclusive green growth economy model is one of the sure ways to achieve sustainable development. As it turns environmental limitations, limitations and constraints into opportunities by transforming current economic systems. That is jobs, employment, production systems, agriculture, energy, renewable transport, among other things. It also involves a new shift investments away from the brown sectors into green technologies, moving away from unsustainable depletion of natural capital and ensuring that social systems are put in place for those fathers behind in society. There is, however, issue of financing as a challenge to ensure this shift. The action for a green economy fundamentally begins with the setting of a country-level targets and goals based on national priorities and conditions, enabling policies and conditions that private sector, building national capacities and promoting proactive win-win labor strategies should be put in place. The pursuit of inclusive green economy must also be anchored on mutually beneficial partnerships, as captured in the SDG 14. Some countries, including my country, Ghana, have taken the lead in the application of the green economy model. It is expected that partnerships for action on green economy, that is PAGE, would assist countries to strengthen cooperation, share experiences as well as lessons learned for the benefit of all, thus leaving no one behind. I have, however, noted the statement made by the first speaker, Christina, about the non-functional, to redirect investment from non-functional to functional ones. We all also need to acknowledge her call for a call to push countries for results. The EU Commissioner's call for all to acknowledge that we have work to do and must be accepted as a clarion call for all to sit up and take up the challenge in these exciting times, as so clearly espoused by the UN Environment Program Director. I think we've had a day, and it is a thought-provoking one. We thank you all for participating in this.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Minister. I'd like to call now on our second speaker from the floor, Mr. Daniel Cahelia Crespo, the Director General of the Environment Directorate for the European Commission, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will be very brief, because I see that there is no disagreement in none of the panelists and in none of the interventions so far on three things. First of all, that we have an imperative need to change the model. We will not be able to continue developing with just one planet because the resources are simply not enough. And this is why we have to change dramatically, and we have to do it fast. Second, there is also a great opportunity in doing so. And for the first time, the international community, with the Paris Agreement, with the Sustainable Development Goals, and with the Circular Economy Strategy, has agreed an agenda for change. Many times businesses say, we don't know if this is going to happen. We do not know, we have no predictability. This is no longer an excuse. This is going to happen. And we have therefore to mobilize all the efforts. All the efforts from the countries, all the efforts from business, all the efforts from the civil society, from the NGOs. And what is very encouraging is to see that there is this consensus from all interested stakeholders to go forward. The European Union is going to very actively support this process of change. And I want to comment one issue, which concerns the sustainable finance. And I would like to announce four very concrete actions on which we are working right now within the Action Plan on Sustainable Finance. We will come with a clearer definition of green bond, because there is a lot of confusion, and we are working at EU level in this area. Second, we want to establish a classification of sustainable economic activities, the famous taxonomy, which we have to integrate in our system. We want to look at disclosure, and we have to improve the disclosure. And we also have to look at the benchmark of what are sustainable economic activities. I think these four areas will be critical, but my final message is that we have no excuse. We have to move fast. There is a sense of urgency. And PAGE is about partnership. And I think in English you say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We need to go far, fast, and together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crespo, for that African proverb. Appreciate it. I'd like to end this excellent discussion and the segment that we've had here with the ideas and the innovations needed to drive green investment and green business practices and really put sustainability into profitability. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our speakers here on this panel, as well as from the floor. Thank you very much. You can exit on the left-hand side. Thank you. And we're just going to set up for the third panel. So it will be just a moment, and I'd like to invite our panelists to join me up here on the stage. Okay, I'm going to start. I see one panelist missing. So that's more time for us. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our third panel discussion of the evening. This is called The Kids Are All Right. We're going to look at the next generation lifestyles and economies and really focus on the important role that individual choice and individual actions have in driving inclusive green economies. And we also want to look at young people that are inspiring change and the way that we can make sustainable lifestyles aspirational and what we can learn from young people and also enable their leadership. Let's go straight to our first speaker, Victoria Tauli Corpuz, UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People. I would be interested in your perspective on how you see Indigenous people playing a greater role in the green economy in a practical sense on all levels.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I think that the phrase inclusive green economy is really crucial for indigenous peoples. As many of you know, indigenous peoples have developed their own economies and governance systems even before colonization, but several of these have been denigrated and destroyed, and when nation states were built, they also adopted the Western model of development, and this has further marginalized and excluded indigenous economies and governance systems. So I think for indigenous peoples, the way that we look at an inclusive green economy, you know, it offers some hope for us because, first of all, if it's the defining feature of the world today is inequality within countries and between countries, and inequality, of course, excludes a lot of people, particularly indigenous peoples, who are the ones who still maintain a lot of the world's biodiversity and protect many of the world's remaining tropical forests. So I think that indigenous peoples can contribute significantly in building an inclusive green economy if number one, their rights as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the ILO Convention 169 are going to be implemented and protected by states. That's the first point. Secondly, that their economies, that their indigenous economies, which have been proven, which are resilient, because all through colonization and nation-state building, these were denigrated, but they maintain it. There are still indigenous livelihoods which are feeding the world. Talk of the pastoralism in Africa, the small-scale farming that's done by indigenous peoples, as well as marine livelihoods. These still are the economies that continue to feed the world, and many of the food systems that they have, the traditional foods that they have developed, are now being recognized as healthier food alternatives. We talk about quinoa, you know, and even this sweet potato. Many of the traditional foods that they have used and continue to use are now being commercialized to an extent that the general population also are able to benefit from this. So I think that the contributions of indigenous peoples will really be crucial in ensuring that the inclusive green economy, the pathways that the inclusive green economy delivers for sustainable development objectives can really be protected and supported and enhanced, not just by the states, but also by the private sector.
Well, what is something that you would like to see when it comes to indigenous people and specific action that you want to happen immediately? Like, what is it that you want?
Well, I think that first of all, the traditional knowledge systems of indigenous people should be protected. It should be reinforced further because this contributes to the sustainability that we are looking for.
So how should it be protected?
Well, first of all, there should be laws that really protects this knowledge, and this should not be misappropriated or misused by others who are not really familiar with that knowledge. And I think that that includes knowledge to traditional medicines, to food systems, as well as resource management practices. This should be protected, but it should also be disseminated widely so that the others who are not familiar with these systems can also learn and use it. So those are some of the very concrete demands that indigenous peoples have.
And can you point to an example where of a success story when it comes to indigenous people engaging in the green economy that can serve as something helpful helpful for all of us here in the room that was done well and that you were happy with?
Well, first of all, I think one contribution is the way that indigenous peoples have conserved and protected forest and biodiversity in most of their territories. The evidence now shows that in countries where the rights to their lands and territories are recognized, there is an overlap between the forests that are kept well and the biodiversity that continues to prosper. And I think the ecosystem services that are offered by these forests and biodiversity is something that really needs to be they should be rewarded for doing that. So these are very concrete actions, and there is data which shows that the money that goes into conservation, much more value is actually provided by indigenous peoples, because of the work that they do and paid, to continue living in those sustainable ways.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Mr. Kimmo Tiilikainen. Tiilikainen, all close, right? Sorry. Minister of Environment, Energy and Housing for Finland. Quite the day in Helsinki today.
Yeah, that's true.
Something was going on there, I heard.
Yeah, there was a kind of summit there.
Yeah.
And I think that
I heard it went well.
Yeah, it's not my job to comment the content of the discussions, but I'm afraid they were not discussing on green economy. I'm not sure.
Well,
but I can give the official statement.
That would be very helpful. Just share with us some of Finland's official experience when it comes to the green economy and sustainable lifestyles. We'll keep it there.
Thank you. Actually, it was often said in Finland that children taught their parents to recycle. And I think that's true. Especially younger generation, people are more and more worried about the climate change and environmental degradation. And one result of that worry is that consumers are getting more interested in their carbon footprint, and the environmental cost or social impacts of the products and services they use. And this makes also investing in sustainability attractive to businesses. However, it's not always easy to be a responsible consumer. I think many of you have been here quite many days, so you may feel a little bit homesick. So imagine the smallest closet for clothing in your home. Imagine that. And then I ask you, how much water you can load inside that closet? At least 50,000 liters. Just put 5 pairs of jeans inside of it. Because the water footprint of 1 pair of cotton jeans is 10,000 liters. So, if I would like to reduce my water footprint, I should avoid cotton. If I choose artificial textiles, I have a big carbon footprint. Or I can release microplastics to the environment. So I'd just like to describe that it's very difficult to estimate the environmental impacts of your consumption. But anyway, people are getting more and more interested in that. One phenomenon I have noticed recently during last decade in Finland is that many young people choose a vegan diet in order to reduce their carbon footprint. So to capitalize on the momentum that people's interest in sustainable consumption and production, we need to make sustainable choices easily available and attractive to consumers.
And how do we do that?
Why are you asking that from me? So I can answer. To do that, we need a revolution. Actually, we need economic revolution to do that. We need transformation from a fossil-based, single-use economy into a circular economy that is based on renewable materials and maximal life cycles for different products and materials. In a circular economy, products are designed to last longer and they are repairable and reusable. Different materials are used and reused over and over again. A concrete example of need for effective reuse is rare earth elements. They are essential for mobile phones and many other electronic products, yet like the name says, they are rare and non-renewable. So we have to recycle them very effectively. So it's a good example on circular economy. But it's not only recycling things, this circular economy, we also need to rethink our approach to ownership. What do we need to own ourselves and what can we co-own, loan or share? In the end, what do we really need and where can we cut down on our consumption or choose more sustainable options? Circular economy, it's not only saving the world, but it also provides many types of business opportunities. Repair services, new services related to shared ownership, recycling businesses, and so on, just to name a few. And I think it's a responsibility of policymakers to push forward this kind of paradigm change in our economy. And it will produce products where the consumers can really do their responsible choices to reduce the environmental impact of the consumption.
Could you share an example with us, something that you view as a great success in Finland that points to lessons we can take away from it?
Actually, I can tell you one very good example that I'm proud of. So we have had a long time a system that there is deposit on plastic bottles, glass bottles, and aluminium cans. It's from 10 cents to 40 cents, but anyway, when people are returning these empty bottles or cans, they got this small amount of money. And the recycling rate is more than 95%. So it really affects that consumers recycle very effectively. This is a very good example of, I would say, circular economy.
What would you say the biggest challenge for you was in Finland?
There are many of them after this summit even. It hasn't solved all our problems. But I think that the biggest threat in circular economy is that we don't exactly know what kind of content different materials and products have. And when we recycle things and we reshape the materials and have different processes to recycle it, we can also cause some harm for environment or for human health if we don't know how the chemicals, for example, in the products react when we are circulating them. So that's why we need to be very careful, and we need to start from the design of the product so that from the very beginning the products are planned in a way that they are recyclable.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's turn to our next panelist, Mr. Lance Gould, the co-founder of the Silicon Valley Story Lab. Lance, we would love it if you could first start by sharing some of your thoughts and experiences with Unleash. Tell us a little bit about that, some of the innovations for SDGs that have been going on, but most importantly, the focus on the power of storytelling for purpose-driven initiatives.
Thank you so much, and such a pleasure to be here. Before I talk about Youth and Unleash, I thought I would talk briefly about what I do, which is storytelling, to give my remarks a little bit of context. I spent 3 decades in journalism, most recently at Huffington Post. Because of social media and blogging, anyone can be a journalist these days, or should I say an enemy of the people. After leaving HuffPost, I started my own new company called Silicon Valley Story Lab, and the idea behind that is that we teach purpose-driven organizations how to think and behave like great media companies. So my partner and I are trying to teach the techniques and strategies that we learned in our decades in journalism to purpose-driven organizations. And as Genevieve, who was on the last panel, noticed and mentioned on his panel, we are currently witnessing a zeitgeist moment where consumers want companies to define who they are and what they stand for. And companies that decide that they want to stand for social good are falling into two distinct categories. One is a CSR model, in which companies do nice things, which fall under the social good umbrella. Maybe they clean up a beach, or they raise funds. The other is a model that we call purpose-aligned responsibility, and that is a model in which companies actually commit to become purpose-driven, and they try to make it a competitive advantage of theirs. They're not just a one-time CSR effort, but they want to align their top and bottom lines with the purpose-driven commitment that they have. So in terms of an example of that, I would say Unleash would be an example of that. Unleash was the brainchild of a Danish, and there's a theme here of Scandinavians, I believe, but it was the brainchild of a Danish philanthropist and entrepreneur from Carlsberg Beer Company. And it was his idea to bring together and convene 1,000 millennials from all over the world in Denmark for 10 days last year, all expenses paid, and have them form teams to try to come up with new ideas that could help achieve the SDGs. And that's what actually happened last year. There were 1,000 millennials from 129 countries. It was pretty amazing. So it all took place in Denmark, all over the country, for a couple of days in Copenhagen, a couple of days in the countryside, and a couple of days in Aarhus, which is the second biggest city there. And what I tried to do to help call it, using storytelling to help call attention to this on a global level, I tried to replicate the Huffington Post blogging ecosystem, which I used to oversee, and I created an Unleashed channel on Medium.com. So I invited all 1,000 of these thought leaders from 129 countries to share their opinions and thoughts on the Medium.com channel. 250 of them accepted. I didn't expect all 1,000 to come through. Some of them, I won't mention the countries, but some of them live in countries where a free internet is not always possible, and hopefully that will remain the case in this country as well. But taking all of those blogs from the 250 authors and putting them on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn with our hashtag really had incredible impact, and eventually we were the #1 trending topic on Twitter in Denmark when we launched on August 10th of last year, August 13th of last year. This year we did the Unleash again in Singapore, and we again were the #1 trending topic in Singapore. So the idea of storytelling, of being able to, we're not doing PR or marketing or branding, not that there's anything wrong with those professions, but that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to teach the actual storytellers that are within each company or within each organization how to surface their stories and get more attention for it.
Lance, I have a similar background to you. I was a former journalist and now building a storytelling platform in Africa. What I find sometimes the most frustrating about being in meetings or organizations today is that you guys have so many amazing stories. All the UN the work, the projects, the initiatives, the European Union and in various countries, indigenous people, and you don't get it out. And I would be interested in your thoughts on what are some of the things in your view that are critical for everybody in this room to understand, like when it comes to storytelling, what's the most effective way to get some of this really great stuff out and not drowned with, all this, all the headlines out there?
That's an excellent question. I'll give you an example from today, is keep it fresh. The first couple of people who came up made some really great jokes and got some good laughs out of the crowd by telling World Cup jokes. You could tell that as the afternoon progressed, the next few people who told those same jokes got less and less attention. It's about innovation and keeping it fresh and keeping it new.
So what should they have done?
Picked another topic. or maybe perhaps they should have been from a different country. But you always want to keep it fresh, you always want to keep it new, or you can make fun of the fact that you're making, you can call attention to the World Cup jokes by saying, I'm not going to do a World Cup joke, or something like that. You can try to turn it on its head. The other thing, that's just, I'm just trying to give you an example from today. One thing that I really recommend using is the editorial calendar. There are let me suggest 4 bullet points that could be really useful for storytelling. Because all of you have great stories. And all of them are worth hearing, but it's how you frame them and present them and get attention that can be most useful to you. So one is using an editorial calendar. And in fact, the 4 bullet points all come from an editorial calendar. Let's start with landmark anniversaries. This year is 2018. 100 years ago was the end of World War I. So this is the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. That's what I call a landmark anniversary. It's the 350th anniversary of New Orleans. It's the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. There are opportunities here to call attention to, we could look at racism through the prism of this being the 50th anniversary of that momentous and horrible day. It's also the 100th anniversary of a joyful day, which is the end of World War I. You can take your content when applicable, not always, but when applicable, and try to put it through the prism of a landmark anniversary. The second would be a tentpole event, such as this event. This event has a hashtag. Use this event to get your content out, and use the hashtag for this event. Davos, UN Week, South by Southwest. These are tentpole events. The Oscars, the Super Bowl. It's not always going to be applicable. But if you can make a joke out of the Helsinki summit, there are opportunities to use humor to access some of these tentpole events. A third would be social awareness days. Obviously, there are many of these on the UN calendar, but there's World AIDS Day on December 1st. There's World Water Day. There's Earth Day. There are any number of these very worthy and very important events, and you can tie all of your green content to these amazing social awareness days. And the fourth would be breaking news. Again, there's the Helsinki summit. There was the World Cup. There's any number of ways to, you can tell a France-Croatia story that has nothing to do with the World Cup, but use that to get eyeballs to tell your story better. So those are 4 tips that I would just offer off the cuff.
And I think that those are excellent, and I would offer a 5th, and then I won't insert myself into this. And which is also, I find that, and I don't know if you agree, but stories that have a central character that demonstrate transformation is always a good way to tell a large story through the experience of an individual. But when you think about storytelling specifically when it comes to the green economy, the environment, what do you, from what you've heard everybody say in the room, how would you frame it up? To be more interesting and less traditional, and different images. How would you do it?
There's so many approaches, and the 4 that I just mentioned are just 4 different ways to do it. But I'll try to play off of the 5th that you just mentioned, using an individual story, a transformational story. One of the talents at Unleash, and there's just incredible stories from these talents. I met last year in Denmark. There was a fellow from Burundi who's a refugee living in a refugee camp in Kenya. He graduated from U.S. college by MOOC, and now he's designing MOOCs for refugees. I was sharing some of these stories last night with some of the UN colleagues that are here. There was a woman who participated last year who was from New York. She's a fashion designer, and she was born with cystic fibrosis, and she is designing hospital gowns with dignity for patients who spend an inordinate amount of time in treatment facilities. So these are beautiful stories, beautiful people, and on a green level, I mean, the Unleash umbrella kind of covered all the SDGs, and some of them, I kind of think of all the SDGs as green territory, even if they're not green-centric, like climate-oriented. I find gender equality, and I find education, and I find health, to me, fall under the green umbrella, even though they may not to other people in this room. But on a very green level, there was a fellow who participated this year, also from New York, and also in the fashion world, who is working with okra DNA and jellyfish DNA, synthetically combining them, to answer your point about fashion and the number of gallons of water it takes to make 1 pair of jeans. He's working with synthetic fabric from okra and jellyfish DNA that after 50 years at the bottom of the ocean will dissolve. And so it will be strong enough to wear and strong enough to wash, but then it won't be there in a landfill forever. So my contribution to today is hopefully to inspire the idea of storytelling as a way to focus on some of the stories that you have in your own organizations and make them as interesting as that one, because they probably are. You just need a way to say it and articulate it.
Thank you. I'd like to take a couple of interventions from the floor. I'd like to invite Matthias Thorns, the Director of Stakeholder Engagement from the International Organization of Employers. Mr. Thorns, could you tell us how private employers can unleash opportunities through the green economy?
Thank you, of course. And let me do actually 3 points to this. First of all, of course, consumers are a driver for change, and we heard this the whole afternoon. That is nothing new, actually, and quite old. But when focusing on the Generation Z and when focusing on millennials, what makes a difference is the access to information, the point to have the access to the stories. And that is important, the affinity to social media when it comes to Generation Z. Already today, if there is an incident at the one end of the world, it can quickly have global impact or impact on the other side of the world through social media, being it good or being it bad impact. And this, of course, will increase, particularly as we have heard just from the colleague on the panel, because companies more and more need to engage in order to tell their story. The second point is with regard to that the Generation Z are not only consumers, but they will be also the future workforce. They will actually choose and change companies' behavior through their career choices. And Jean-Yves Fillon actually alluded to it, that for them it becomes more and more important the reputation of the employers and in how far they engage in the sustainability agenda. So companies which will attract the best talent need to engage in the sustainability agenda to be able to do so. My last point is about inclusiveness, and we heard about it also before. When approaching sustainability, you really have to go through all 3 pillars. A green job is not automatically a good job. A green job becomes a good job when it is safe and when the working conditions are fair. On the other side of the coin, you can say this whole idea about green jobs is not valuable, it's not good in order to try evaluate whether jobs are good jobs or not good jobs. The aim must be to make all jobs more sustainable, meaning it more greener, but also better and fairer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Raul Lucas, the Ministerial Advisor on Foreign Trade, Investment and International Cooperation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Guyana.
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me? Okay, yes you are. Thank you very much. I will admit to you that when we learned of this event, we decided to ask to be a part of it. And the reason we asked to be a part of it is because Guyana is in the process of developing the Green State Development Strategy. It is being assisted by the United Nations Environment and a number of other partners. And we wanted to learn a bit more of what was happening outside of our sphere of operation. So we asked to be here. But there's another reason. The other reason has to do with the fact that we recognize that in our country, if we are to bring about change, particularly through the platform of production and consumption, it would be important to have our businesses involved. In our case, small businesses are the ones that matter. And we're trying to find out to what extent there were ways or thoughts or experiences on how small businesses have been contributing to the movement towards a sustainable economy. And the reason for that is, of course, we think that small businesses are much more flexible than the larger ones and would therefore be more inclined to move much faster. In that sense, the International Small Business Summit, which Guyana is hosting, it's called the Green Guyana Expo and International Small Business Summit. And what it intends to do primarily is to platform the Green State Development Strategy and to share with the people in Guyana what it's all about so that we could increase at a faster rate the acceptance of the responsibility for greening our world. The other reason is we want to highlight critical things and business opportunities that small businesses could have in helping to, transform our brown economy to a more sustainable one. And the third thing, of course, is to try to encourage the government to develop policies which would be geared towards helping the small businesses to shift from the brown economy to the green economy. It's not going to be an easy thing for small countries like Guyana, 800,000 people as population, 4 billion GDP. But we also have a substantial amount of forest cover in the country. Over 80% of the country is still forested. And while we do employ a low-carbon development strategy with respect to forest management and use, what we recognized was that that would not be sufficient to accommodate the other concerns, the other aspects of our economy, because we know that if we continue to produce the way in which we are producing, then pretty soon people will not buy from us. There will not be a market. So there's a need for us to understand what is happening globally and to be able to adjust accordingly in order to be able to be a part of this process. So I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raul. Please join me in thanking all of the speakers now on our panel, and as well as the contributions from the floor, with another round of applause for our excellent panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Time now for our final panel. It's a final session, so hang in there. We want to explore the question, where to now, and go over some of the next steps and listen to the concluding remarks. So I'd just like us to pause for a moment while we transition out here and have our next speakers just make some short statements on and reflections on what they've heard today. So we'll just be one moment. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really looking for some insights and reflections on what we heard today, and just give us a takeaway on some of your thoughts and analysis of what you've heard. That would be of practical value to us as we go forward. So to help us get started, let me first introduce Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization, to share some of the reflections on what we've heard today. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. And it is the end of, I suspect, a long day, so I'm going to be fairly concise in what I say. I've just stepped in and listened to the last two panels today. And I wonder if people who've spent all afternoon here just realise how encouraging and optimistic you're all sounding in this room. You're having a violent agreement, it seems to me, and that's very encouraging. So I suppose the first thing to say is, when you ask what happens next, what would we do next, is to conclude that we're doing pretty well. We're on the right road, so, just carry on. But I think that's a slightly too optimistic sort of assessment of where we are. Number one, and from the perspective of my organisation, it is true to say I think that from an employment, from a production perspective, we've come an awfully long way in an awfully short period of time. Are we allowed to make confessions or give some bad stories here very quickly?
You can make confessions, yes.
Right. I led an organisation which opposed the Kyoto Protocol up until the year 2000 because a major industrial organisation felt that there was a choice to be made between jobs on the one hand and environmental considerations on the other. The tipping point, and you can all have your views about why that has happened, is we have overcome what today transpires as a false choice between jobs, growth, development on the one hand, and prosperity and protecting the planet on the other. This has unlocked all sorts of possibilities. I think Paris has both sanctioned that situation and advanced it. But I do think there is a challenge that remains out there. You know, I've heard people in the short time I've been with you quote very positive examples from Finland, from Denmark. They tend to be the places people quote. Why do we do it? Because these are countries which not only have very strong social consensus around collective objectives, but they also have the mechanisms for bringing together different parties and working out the way to realize them. So if you turn that into the things I'm interested in, which is how to reconcile and align climate change action with jobs, employment, prosperity, you have, I think, to learn some lessons from these extraordinarily effective methods of dialogue to create consensus, and from there to hammer out courses of action. Now, we do believe, and research we have done in our organisation in recent years has confirmed, that there is a major employment dividend to be had from action to protect the planet, from action against climate change. To give you the sort of the headline figure, we reckon that 24 million jobs can be had from here to 2030 from action against climate change. There'll be 6 million lost, so you get a sort of a payoff of 18 million. But none of this is automatic, and none of this will happen just by sitting down and watching, sitting back and watching. My second anecdote, and I'll put it back, my worst experience in this area was when I was working in the labour movement, going and having a friendly conversation with brown coal miners in Silesia, southwest Poland, Solidarność unions, and trying to convince them of the merits of the things that we're all talking about here. That was a very painful experience, and I lost that conversation. And quite rightly so. Why? Because I was trying to persuade them of the merits of closing down their very dirty coal mining operation for the benefits of environmental protection, and sort of blithely ignoring the fact that there was absolutely zero alternative employment options in that part of the country. Zero. And by the way, the mine closed down, and there are zero prospects in that part of Poland. Conclusion: consensus building, take into account the needs of people for decent jobs. You have to engineer these things. You have to do it through dialogue. You have to do it through industrial planning. You have to involve, of course, the private sector in the ways that we have been told. You have to gather in the financing, which I've heard very positive things about. But it does take, I think, this extra element of planning, industrial planning, something we've tended to get out of the habit of in recent years, to make sure that the thing drives forward. That's the way forward.
Where can we do better?
Well, I think precisely in the notion that, you know, believing that action against climate change, action to protect the planet, is itself sustainable without accounting for and taking on board these other economic and social dimensions. That's where we have to do better, and we have to finance that. You know, I heard the very encouraging comments made about the availability of green finance. We've got an international dimension to all of this, of course, about the transfer of finance, not just profit-seeking finance, but a degree of solidarity finance in all of this. We've got to take that much more seriously, in my view.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Mr. Sim Kistler, the President of the UN Environment Assembly, to share some of your reflections on our discussions tonight, and whether you're in violent agreement or something else, and really just try and link it for us also with the theme of next year's 4th UN Environment Assembly, which is going to be on innovations for environmental challenges.
Well, I'll start with our last Environment Assembly, which took place last year. And the main theme there was pollution. It was about pollution. And there we discussed how to find good procedures to disclose what the situation is, to get honest data, what is the situation in different countries with
air quality, soil pollution, water pollution, etc., etc. And the logical next step in order to reduce pollution, we need innovation and we need greener economy, right? And I agree completely what was mentioned here, that we should not be moralistically finger-pointing and saying that you need to be greener, or when we talk about youngest generations, that I cannot go home to my children and say, you must be greener, it doesn't work this way. But when we talk about pollution, I don't see any people who are supportive about pollution. I know indifferent people. I know people who say, I don't care. But most of the people got worried when we talk about pollution. It's bad. It's bad for the people. So if we say that we change, we're discussing here about transforming economies and lifestyles, and if we show that changing our lifestyle helps to reduce pollution, I think there's lots of potential there. Lots of people, especially younger generation, who will come together with us to make a change. And if we can change the market, the lifestyle, it's about consumption. It's about the market for the companies, for the industries. What kind of products do they produce? And the market is there. We know there's potential there. People are ready to buy products which are greener in the process of production, or processing waste in this production. But the thing is, we cannot compare different producers. Whether we discussed here construction, or with energy, it's maybe easier. But most of the products, I always think about people I notice in the grocery stores. When you go there and you notice people reading the information on different food products, the ingredients. There are more and more people who are very attentive to this. But when I go to a furniture store and I want to buy a chair for myself, for a table, how could I tell which piece of furniture is greener? There is no information on this, no way to determine. But if we could supply this information or make it obligatory to find it on some internet page somewhere, then we can tell, and then those producers get competitive advantage. And when we talk about transforming the economy, it's, often we discuss about very complicated problems, like you rightfully brought the issue of coal miners. But maybe really we don't have a solution for them today. But we're not in a phase of saturation or excelling. It's not about that 90% of our economy is already green and we need to tackle the problem of the last 10%. I cannot think of any industry where our green share is bigger than 50%. It's less than half everywhere. So today it's about scaling up. And there's so much potential. And if we talk about financing also, one thing is about values and ratings, which was discussed here, but another thing is money goes where there is more potential. And if we see that there is potential, there will be money also. So it's in many industries, it's still like startups. It's still the beginning. So in this sense, I'm much more optimistic. I think it will be much easier once we can, and it was discussed here also, that we need disclosure, we need transparency, we need data which we can monitor, and then we can compare different businesses, different companies, different industries, and there is enough people out there to make already today responsible choices once they have the information available.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Mr. Nikhil Seth, the Executive Director of the UN Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, to say a few words about what you've heard today, and also through the lens of your own expertise of training and research.
Thank you, Zain. It's tough to be the penultimate speaker, but Minister Edna is going to have an even tougher job. But let me say this, that I've been in and around the concept of sustainable development for almost 3 decades. Most of my working life in the UN has been in and around this, starting in 1992 with the first Earth Summit. And each time we have a discussion, the rich discussion of the type we've had today, it always strikes me that there's so much to inspire, there's so much to learn, there's so much knowledge. But are we reaching enough people? And it's that critical mass of people that we reach that's going to make a difference. Are we able, for example, to influence academia enough to have this kind of integrated thinking? Are we reaching school children the way we need to reach them? Are we reaching public policy officials the way we reach them? Of course, awareness is there among the people who lead organizations, who are involved in UN discussions. I see in this crowd many people I've known over these years, and we've talked to each other about these things very often. But are we penetrating the minds of the decision makers who we need to penetrate? Have we got to the business sector as deeply as we need to do? And what is this bridge between the beautiful platforms we establish in the UN and action which makes a difference in the lives of people we've set out to help, particularly the most distressed in these 92 most distressed countries, that is half the membership of the United Nations? What are we doing to translate our vision, the beautiful platforms we've established? And here's where my organization comes in, training. And I feel this inspiration, education, thought changes is the toughest part of our business. Human beings, we are all products of habit. We all go in the morning, we switch on the computer, and we more or less continue to do the things that the way we've been doing them for long periods of time. How do we change that? How do we get attitudinal and behavioral shifts? And unless we can carry out the inspiration and the encouragement and the vision we see in small rooms like this, to multiply that by a factor of many millions in each society, in each country, we're not going to get there. So the case I want to make is for a much stronger effort at awareness and attitudinal and behavioral shifts in every sector of society. And of course, what you were saying yourself as a journalist and so on, there's a heavy responsibility of that kind of responsible journalism, which will bring some of this inspiration to the people we want to help us change the world, to get to the 2030 targets and goals the way we've been promised by our political leadership. The second thing I want to say is, where next? We are discussing all this in the context of a partnership. We are discussing this in the context of PAGE, of 5 UN entities coming together, and each of these entities have been represented today by the heads, which itself is very encouraging. That means the heads of these organizations are fully vested in this partnership. Secondly, those donors who've contributed generously, many of them I see in the room, they have all been enthusiastic of this partnership. Third, and most important, our work has been in some of the most distressed countries, and we have been demand-driven. It's not as if we've gone to these countries with preconceived notions of our own to help them change. No, we've responded to the demands that have come from these countries. So what's next? We have a plan till 2020. And my hope is that when we come to the period after 2020, and we look at this partnership, build up our own repertoire of experiences and what we've learned, we scale it up, we at least triple the number of countries who benefit from this partnership. We encourage donors to see this model working. They've complained in the past that the UN doesn't get its act together, that UN system entities are always squabbling about resources. but we've had no squabble of resources. We've had fair sharing of resources. We've responded to needs of the countries. We've been demand-driven. So I'd say to the donors that, look, this is a model which has worked. Help us scale it up by a factor of 3 at least for the next phase. So that's what's next.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. Thank you. Let's invite our final speaker, no pressure, on our panel, Ms. Edna Molewa, the Minister of Environmental Affairs for South Africa, to say a few words, as well as share some of the experiences of South Africa through advancing the green economy through partnerships. I also understand the next Global Page Ministerial Conference is going to be held in South Africa, so it is appropriate that you close.
Yes, indeed. Madam Moderator, let me start by thanking you to allow us to be on this panel. And definitely there is pressures, even as you may want to say something different to me. It is a pleasure for me to be the last speaker. But I stand on the shoulders of those who have been on this podium before and indeed want to say this initiative, rather sustainable development, much as it has been said, that we have come a long way with the notion and the policies of sustainable development. However, as we move on, I would like to believe that indeed there has been quite a lot of improvement, engagement, of people joining in. And I was responding to a question earlier on where one was asked that what are you taking home from a panel like this one, but also from the discussions that were taking place for this whole week here. I do think that it is important just to reflect a bit on the past. A few years ago, when we were approached, Germany's here, UNEP structures, all the other 5 organizations in South Africa, to join the green economy in particular. We were at UNEP, I remember, and we really had to struggle first to understand, and listening to some of the colleagues were saying, hey, this green economy issue, how are we going to navigate this and around this whole thing? And people were a bit skeptical, I must say, including us. What's happening today, I think there's more and more of us who are practically implementing programs, not just thinking about it, but practically implementing programs. What has happened is that in our case in South Africa, we have ensured first that in a practical sense, we put measures to plan the green economy initiatives, embodied all those of our plans in greening our economy in the National Strategy for Sustainable Development and Action Plan. We've also put that in the New Growth Path, as well as in the Industrial Policy Action Plan that we have developed as a country, and also in the Integrated Urban Development Framework, in the Water Strategy that's integrated, also in the Integrated Resource Plan, that's and as well as the Energy Plan. The objective being to ensure that, because every planning that we do, we work on together with all our stakeholders, partners, civil society, and business, so that everybody becomes part and parcel of this. And I must tell you that this is actually something that has led South Africa to becoming as successful as we are right now on some of the programs. The renewable energy program, you know that we are one of the countries that are most successful in the world in introduction of the renewable energy. And the aim is to have 42% of production of our energy coming from the renewables, and ensuring that we move away from coal-based, not completely away, obviously, but introduction of new technologies. And that, we believe, will contribute to better policy coordination, strengthening dialogue and deepening collaboration in the green economy policy and planning, but will also ensure that we identify potential and enabling factors in the selected green economy areas, because we couldn't be everywhere and anywhere. We had selected green economy sectors that we embarked upon, and ensuring that we strengthen capabilities through enhancing skills and capacity today and sharing knowledge with all other people who are in South Africa and elsewhere. I must tell you that we do believe that indeed going forward, if the world moves as we do, again, with funding that can come on board, particularly for those who are willing to get into the green economy sectors and being supported through technology, all the means of implementation, we will be able to make a difference. Change of consumption patterns through ensuring that we move into circular economy is one of the areas that we in South Africa moved into, because we have to ensure that we utilize our natural resources from cradle to cradle. Already we have begun in some of the industries, the plastic area, which we are reviewing right now. A lot of recycling is happening. Production of energy from waste is already happening, and we are reusing our natural resources. So I think that we are very confident that from sessions of this nature, from collaboration, from working together, from learning, through learning from one another, we can ensure that this movement grows worldwide and indeed we become successful. It's not going to happen overnight. We must not underestimate that, but we must continue to inspire one another. I got inspiration from the listening just to parties here today, and I think I'm taking that inspiration along. As we meet in South Africa, it'll be in January, no longer in September. Unfortunately, your calendar is always full. People who are in this room, you have informed us that you are not able to be there in September because we've got to be elsewhere. So first or second week of January, early January, somewhere there, would expect to have you in South Africa. Come and inspire most of our people on the continent by being there. And of course, at UNEP as well, be there. We will certainly be increasing and growing this movement of our people around greening our economies and sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Please give a warm round of applause for all our panelists just now, closing this out. And thanks to all of you for being such a wonderful audience and hanging in there and being a participant of this event. I'd like to, on behalf of the organizers now, invite everyone to the reception and have a drink. Thank you.